Hello everyone. Tonight, I've got a batch of chilling tales to share with you. But before we dive in, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me keep creating even better content. Now, sit back, relax, and join me as we embark on this eerie journey together. I arrived at the Grand Maple Hotel just as the sun surrendered to dusk, its golden light drowning in the horizon. The lobby was a vast cavern of crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Everything gleamed with an almost unnatural perfection. I'd been promised luxury, a brief respite from my chaotic life, but something about the place felt off. Maybe it was the way the doorman's smile didn't reach his cold gray eyes, or the hush so absolute that my footsteps sounded like gunshots in the empty hall. My keycard clicked, granting me access to room 407. When the door swung open, I saw a narrow corridor leading to the main chamber. The wallpaper, once ornate burgundy damask, was peeling at the edges, revealing patchy yellow beneath. A chill raced down my spine. I told myself the hotel was old, a relic of a bygone era, and that maintenance would fix these little flaws. I shrugged and dropped my bags. Night fell hard. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant hum of the elevator and the soft tick of a wall clock. I turned on the television for company, let it flicker inanely in the corner while I unpacked. But as I arranged my books on the nightstand, I caught movement in the black reflection of the large gilded mirror above the dresser. I spun around. Nothing. Just me, framed by faded wallpaper, and a bed laid out with crisp, white linens. White. An hour later, I realized dinner was a mistake. I felt restless, unable to settle. The room's shadows stretched at the corners, and the air tasted stale like stale breath. I switched off every light except a single lamp, its weak bulb struggling against the dark. When I lay down, the bed felt too firm, unwelcoming, as though it anticipated something. Sleep came in short, ragged bursts. I dreamed of muffled whispers, voices just beyond comprehension, seeping through the walls. I woke sweating the darkness, alive with soft hisses. I lay still, listening as the whispers faded. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was the thinness of the walls, other guests talking in the hallway. Still no footsteps ever came. On my third sleepless night, I saw her. She stood just beyond the foot of the bed, pale as moonlight, her dark hair clinging to her cheeks in damp strands. Her nightgown hung loose, as if she'd stepped out of some forgotten era. I froze, heart hammering. Her lips parted, and for a moment, I glimpsed those fractured whispers, just a breath of sound. Then she turned away, as if beckoning me to follow, compelled by terror and something darker. I rose from the bed and stepped into the corridor. The door slammed shut, plunging me into near-total darkness. I fumbled for the lamp switch. The hateful click echoed. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, a tunnel of doors leading into blackness. At the far end, she stood waiting. "Come," she breathed, her voice a fractured sigh that reverberated in my skull. I tried to move, but felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the brush of her sorrow. I watched her glide down the corridor, passing door after door. I forced my legs to follow, adrenaline crackling in my veins. The doors were identical. Room 406, Room 408, yet none bore the number I needed. Behind each I imagined horrors far worse than mere spectral longing. She paused at a door marked simply with peeling gold numbers. No number, no name. She pressed her hand to the doorframe, and the wood shuddered as if alive. "Why are you here?" she whispered. I'm staying here," I managed, voice trembling. I'm just a guest." Her head tilted at an impossible angle. "You wandered here," she said. "This place isn't for the living." I swallowed hard, panic clawing at my throat. "I'll go back," I said, my voice small. "I'll go back to 407. She glided aside, and the door swung open. Inside was a room bathed in dull yellow light. In the center, a dusty chaise lounge faced a wall of mirrors at every angle. My reflection multiplied and warped. I stepped inside, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. Behind me, the door slammed. The walls began to close in mirrors, shifting, until I saw dozens of pale faces staring back, each mouth moving, whispering, "Stay, stay, stay." I pounded on the door. My knuckles bled. No answer. The mirrors rippled like water, and the whispers swelled into a deafening chorus. My reflection reached out its lips, forming shapes that I couldn't quite make out. Then all at once, the glass shattered inward. I felt dozens of cold fingers brush my skin. I screamed. The door flung open, and I tumbled into the hallway. The wing was empty, silent. My heart thundered. I looked down at my shaking hands. The skin on my wrists was wet, as if I'd been submerged in cold water. I dashed back to room 407, fumbling with the key card. It wouldn't work. The card reader glowed red. Behind me, a faint whisper. "You belong here." Eerie. I spun. There stood the pale woman, her eyes shining like wet stones. She extended a hand. "You shouldn't have come." I bolted past her. The corridor looped impossibly on itself until I found the stairwell. I sprinted down and burst into the lobby, gasping for air. The doorman watched me approach, his smile distant. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked. I shook my head, silence choking me. He nodded sympathetically. "Room 407, you said." I managed a nod. He gestured at the elevator. "I'll have someone escort you to another room." I fled to the shuttle van. The hotel summoned, never looking back. As we pulled away into the night, I saw the building's windows glisten with a strange light, each pane reflecting a face I barely recognized mine. I still feel those whispers every time I close my eyes. Sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back on that chaise lounge, pressed against cold glass, and I hear her sorrowful plea. "Stay, stay." I checked into the old Willow House Inn on a drizzly October afternoon, drawn by its reputation for Gothic charm and candlelit corridors. The clerk, a thin woman with hollow cheeks and inky eyes, handed me a tarnished brass key without a word. My room, she said, was just down the hall, left past the grand staircase. Even her silence felt deliberate, as though warning me not to ask questions. The lobby smelled of damp wood and fading lavender. Rain tapped a Morse code against the leaded windows, while the gas lamps flickered, projecting wavering shadows onto the wallpaper. I carried my overnight bag down the mahogany hallway, where portraits of stern-faced ancestors stared from gilded frames. One in particular caught my eye, a pale young girl with dark braids and an inscrutable smile. Her eyes seemed to shift when I blinked. My door swung open easily. Room 12. It was small but cozy. A four-poster bed draped in velvet. A writing desk scarred by time, and an antique wardrobe carved with ornate motifs of twisting vines. Under the stairs in a shadowed alcove sat a heavy wooden cupboard chained shut, its iron padlock gleaming in the lamp's glow. I frowned. The clerk hadn't mentioned any cupboard, and why install a locked cabinet in a guest room? I shrugged it off as eccentric decor and unpacked. As evening deepened, I drew a hot bath in the clawfoot tub and sank into steaming water. Through the frosted window, I watched rain swirl over the garden maze. When I turned off the taps, water sloshed against the porcelain, then a faint thud echoed from beneath the stairs. Heart pounding, I wrapped myself in a towel and crept toward the cupboard. My reflection in the polished floorboards was pale and uncertain. The door to the wardrobe beside it was slightly ajar. Odd, since I'd closed it. But I stared at the cupboard. The chain was sturdy, the padlock rusted. Behind it, I could make out deep scratches on the wood, as though something had tried to force its way out. I backed away, telling myself it was nothing. Perhaps maintenance used that cupboard for supplies and forgot to lock it back. I abandoned the idea of investigating further and dressed for dinner in the inn's dining room. That night, the corridors were hushed except for my own footsteps. I passed the portrait of the smiling girl. This time, she seemed to watch me with longing. In the dining room, guests whispered over steaming bowls of stew. The innkeeper moved silently between tables, refilling water glasses without speaking. Back in my room, the cupboard thudded again, more forceful this time, like someone inside battering the wood. My blood ran cold. I flicked on the lamp. The chain lay on the floor in a neat coil, the padlock missing. My heart lurched. I didn't remember touching it. I approached with trembling steps. The door hung slightly ajar. Beyond the threshold lay pitch darkness. I peered inside, breathing shallow. The cupboard was deeper than it looked, its back wall disappearing into black. Then I saw movement, two pale fingers curling from the lip of the opening knuckles, scraping the floorboards as they tried to pull someone out. I stumbled backward, every nerve ablaze. A low moan welled from the darkness. I spun on my heel and swore when I saw the wardrobe door creak open wider. But its interior was empty. I backed into the corridor, pressing myself against the wall as the moan rose to a wet, gurgling cry. Through the gloom, I made out two glowing pinpricks of light in the cupboard's depths' eyes. They hovered just beyond reach. Something inside wanted out. I forced myself to advance the beam of my phone flashlight, slicing through the darkness. The air grew cold, stale, reeking of rot. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. The eyes widened. A small face appeared, sunken cheeks, cracked lips, the same dark braids as the girl in the portrait. She stared at me, expression empty. Her arms reached for me, nails long and dirt-streaked. I staggered back, tripping over my bag. My head struck the wall. Stars danced across my vision. I heard soft footsteps behind me. Another presence, taller, slower. I dared a glance past the wardrobe and saw only my own shaking reflection. The girl's voice echoed a warped whisper. "Help me." The words chilled me deeper than any scream. She pulled herself halfway out, slick black hair trailing behind her like seaweed. I lunged for the cupboard door, yanking it shut. Her shriek split my eardrums as the wood reverberated. I slammed the chain over the handle and snapped the padlock into place as if possessed by terror. Blood pounded in my ears as I collapsed against the wall. My breath came in jagged gasps. I wiped sweat and tears from my eyes. When I dared to look at my hands, they were smeared with grime, and the padlock wasn't old and rusted anymore. It was pristine, polished iron, as though brand new. I didn't sleep. I stayed huddled in a chair by the window until dawn, the cupboard looming behind me like a coffin. The rain had stopped, but the world felt soaked in dread. When the clerk knocked at my door, with breakfast, lipstick-stained note card in hand, I jumped. "Sorry to disturb you," she said softly, "but we have to move you." My pulse skidded. Why? She avoided my gaze. Maintenance discovered water damage beneath the floor. "You can't stay in room 12. She handed me the note card. In neat cursive, it read, "Occupied. Do not open." I fled the inn that morning with my bag in hand. The clerk watched from the doorway, her lips trembling. "We're very sorry," she whispered. "Some doors should remain locked." I didn't look back as I drove away on the slick country road, but in my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the inn's silhouette against a pale sky. And behind the leaded window of room 12, two frightened eyes stared at me, begging to be freed once more. I never told anyone the whole story, but sometimes late at night, when the wind rattles my windows, I hear soft scratching from beneath my bed, and a tiny voice just beyond hearing, like a dream, half-remembered whispers, "Help me." I checked into the Ravenwood Hotel late one winter evening, the wind howling like a wounded animal outside. The lobby was bathed in the sickly glow of antique sconces, each casting trembling shadows across the walls. The receptionist, a gaunt woman with feathered hair and coal dark eyes, handed me a tarnished metal key without a word, only nodding toward the grand staircase. "Suite 212, she said, in a voice so soft I thought I'd imagined it. The stairs creaked beneath my boots as I ascended each step, echoing through the cavernous hall. The wallpaper was a faded tapestry of twisting thorns and icy drafts whispered down the corridor. When I reached Suite 212, I found the door ajar. I paused, heart thudding. Inside, the room looked untouched. Pristine white sheets, a perfectly made bed, and a silver tea service laid out on a polished oak table. It was as though someone had set it up for my arrival. A chill crept up my spine. I closed the door behind me and let out a slow breath. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. I shook the thought away and set my bag down, resolving to warm up with tea. I poured steaming water into the delicate china cup, inhaling the fragrant steam. As I sipped, I heard a soft rustle behind me. I turned. The maid stood in the corner, her uniform pristine, her face obscured by a pale veil. I hadn't heard footsteps. The cup rattled in my hand. She inclined her head as though observing me, but said nothing. My skin prickled. "Excuse me," I managed. "I didn't expect anyone else here." She lifted one slender finger to her lips, a silent injunction to be still. Then she vanished. I spun around, tea sloshing over the rim of the cup. The closet door beside the wardrobe stood slightly open. I stifled a scream and lunged forward, closing it, half expecting her to step out and whisper again. The closet was empty, except for crisp uniforms on wooden hangers. No veil, no gloves, no phantom silhouette. Heart pounding, I decided I'd better call the front desk. But my phone lay dead on the bed, its battery inexplicably drained. I tried the lamp switch. Nothing. The room plunged into gray twilight. Only the moonlight filtering through frost-laced windows offered any visibility. I fumbled for my jacket and stepped into the hallway. The lights were out here too. The corridor stretched black and silent. I retraced my steps toward the stairs, but the air grew denser, the hush deeper. Then I heard it, a soft song lilting and fractured, drifting from the end of the hall. I followed, drawn by morbid curiosity. The walls narrowed, the temperature dropping so fast my breath hissed in icy clouds. At the far end, a door creaked open. Inside, the maid stood by a writing desk. Her veil lifted to reveal hollow sockets where her eyes should have been. She bent over the desk, penning something in an ancient ledger bound in cracked leather. The moonlight gleamed on the ink as she wrote, "Guest 212, observed noted bound." I watched, paralyzed. The ledger thumped closed. She turned, her lips curled into a mournful smile. "You mustn't leave," she whispered, voice like brittle porcelain. "The master will want to welcome you." A figure emerged from the shadows behind her. A tall man in a frock coat, face gaunt, and pale eyes, black as fresh ink. My blood froze. He stepped into the moonlight, expression welcoming. "Ah," he said softly. "Our new guest." "Let me go," I stammered. I need to leave." The maid placed a gloved hand on my arm. Her touch was ice. "You agreed to stay, darling," she cooed. "You signed when you entered." I looked down and saw my hand clutching the ledger. My name was inscribed at the bottom of the last page alongside a dark handprint that seemed to pulse with foul life. I tried to drop it, but my fingers wouldn't let go. The master smiled. "Welcome to Ravenwood," he murmured. The door slammed shut, the windows rattled. The moon vanished behind a cloud. I awoke in my bed, the ledger gone, but the handprint burning on my palm. The room was empty, but I heard the soft scratch of pen on paper somewhere below the floorboards. A muffled lullaby drifted through the air, sung by a voice both sweet and hollow. I fled down the staircase, bursting into the lobby, where the receptionist smiled as though she'd been expecting me. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. "Your tea was never finished." I couldn't answer. I bolted through the grand doors into the freezing night, my heart a war drum in my chest. I didn't look back until I glimpsed her standing at the window, of sweet 212 veil billowing in the wind. She pressed her hand against the glass and mouthed words I could not hear, but the feeling of her sorrow reached me. "Stay." To this day, I can't drink tea. And when I close my eyes at night, I still hear that lullaby and feel the maid's frozen hand brushing my cheek, binding me to Ravenwood forever. I arrived at the Lunar Crest Hotel just before midnight. The sky, a jagged tear of stars above the glass towers. The doorman, a hulking man with an expression as frozen as the marble pillars, handed me a crystal key. "Penthouse pool suite," he rumbled, voice echoing off the domed lobby. I managed a grateful nod and rode the golden elevator up each floor, celebration glimmering through mirrored walls. When the doors opened, I stepped onto a private terrace overlooking the city lights. The centerpiece was an indoor pool carved from obsidian tile its water illuminated by bluish LEDs. Steam curled into the air like ghostly tendrils. I exhaled, feeling the tension of travel melt away to the pool's gentle burble. I changed into swim trunks and eased into the water. It was warmer than I expected, enveloping me in silky warmth. I floated on my back, gazing at the glass ceiling. The stars above seemed brighter here, as though the hotel had captured the cosmos. I closed my eyes. A soft splash jolted me awake. I sat up, scanning the water. Nothing. I listened, just the hum of the filtration system. I swore the splash had sounded too deliberate to be random. I stood and waded to the shallow end where a submerged LED glowed brighter than the rest. When I knelt to inspect it, I saw what looked like a dark shape drifting just beyond the light's halo. "Hello," I called, voice catching in my throat. No answer. I reached out fingertips, brushing the water. A frigid pulse rippled up my arm. The shape recoiled, retreating into the pool's deeper shadows. My heart pounded. I climbed out, knees wobbling, and wrapped a towel around my shoulders. I pressed my hand to the glass wall to steady myself and froze. Along the inside of the glass, dozens of tiny handprints trailed upward as if children had pressed their palms against the pool's walls from below. The prints ended at water level, then continued above it, streaked with condensation, as if something had climbed something. With slender, urgent fingers, I stumbled back. My towel fell forgotten. Fragments of murmured laughter drifted across the terrace. I whipped around, expecting to see someone. Nothing but empty lounge chairs and silent planters. My throat went dry, summoning courage. I returned to the pool's edge. The handprints had vanished, leaving the glass smooth and clean. I shivered. The air felt too cold all at once. I wrapped the towel around myself and hurried back toward the suite entrance. The door handle was ice cold. I clenched my teeth, twisted it, and stepped inside. The suite was cavernous floor-to-ceiling windows, a chaise lounge, a polished bar. A tall, narrow mirror leaned against one wall. I flicked on the lights. Reflected behind me, I saw nothing. No dripping water, no wet footprints, only my trembling reflection. I backed away, flicking off the light. Then at the far end of the room, beneath the mirror's frame, an imprint on the carpet. A small footprint, wet, muddy, and impossibly small. I leaned closer. Then the impression shifted, one foot, then another. The imprint stamped itself deeper into the rug, as though someone were pacing behind me. I whirled around. The suite was empty. The bar stools stood pristine, untouched. My pulse thundered. I grabbed my phone, and it lit up with dozens of unread messages from an unknown number. "Come back. It's cold." I dropped the phone. The screen cracked, flickering shards of light across the wall. My breath fogged in the now frigid air. I backed toward the elevator door, but the call button was gone. The panel had been replaced by a single rune etched into steel, a circle pierced by a jagged line. I raced to the penthouse stairs through a hidden door marked Service Exit. The stairwell was narrow, industrial metal grating and exposed pipes. I sprinted down, hearing wet, slapping footsteps above me. I told myself it was the wind. I forced my lungs to burn each step, rattling beneath my boots. Halfway down, the lights blinked and died. Pitch black. My phone torch flickered on, illuminating swaying shadows. A soft, high-pitched giggle echoed. Then a scream too shrill, too abrupt, like a child's anguish shrieking from the bottom of its soul. I froze, blood like ice in my veins. The scream came again from somewhere above. It reverberated down the shaft, pummeling my eardrums. I backed into the wall, sliding down, until I sat on the cold concrete. I wrapped my arms around my knees, rocking slightly. The silence that followed was worse heavy expectant. Then, from the darkness at the top of the stairs, I heard dripping. A single droplet hitting metal over and over. Drip, drip, drip. It grew faster until it became a steady patter, like a rainstorm trapped in a bottle. The noise marched down the stairwell toward me, growing louder. My flashlight flickered off. Total silence. Then a cold breath on my neck. My skin prickled. I couldn't move. Behind me, a tiny voice whispered, "I'm so cold." I screamed and bolted upward, hands seeking the handrail. The steps were slick, as though varnished with water. I slipped twice, but managed to stay upright. My ears rang. At the top, I flung open the penthouse door. Light flooded the stairwell, and the dripping stopped. I skidded inside. The terrace was empty. No footprints, no handprints. The pool's water lay placid, the LEDs dark. I stumbled to the elevator lobby and hammered the service button. The elevator arrived with a ding that echoed in the night. As the doors opened, I caught sight of something in the reflection. Behind me, a small girl in a wet white dress, her back to me as she stared into the empty pool. She turned slowly, water streaming from her hair, and gazed at me with hollow eyes. I screamed and dove into the elevator just as the doors slid shut. On the ride down, the lights flickered, and I saw her pressed against the glass, her face blurred mouth open in a silent wail. The doors opened on the lobby. I bolted past a stunned doorman, through the revolving doors, and into the night. I left without my belongings. I never learned the meaning of that rune by the elevator, and I can't explain the trembling footprints tracing the suite's plush carpet. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel a damp chill at my shoulder and hear a tiny voice whisper, "I'm still cold." I arrived at the Crestfall Hotel well past midnight, my head pounding from the red-eye flight. The marble lobby was deserted, its cavernous silence broken only by the distant drip of a busted fountain. The night clerk, a hollow-eyed man in a rumpled tuxedo, tossed me my keycard without meeting my gaze. "Room 909, he muttered, already ringing up a late check-in for another guest I could neither see nor hear. The corridor to the elevators stretched long and dim sconces flickering in weak orange pulses. My footsteps echoed unnaturally as I pressed the button. The elevator's doors parted with a groan. Its interior bathed in a jaundiced light that made my skin crawl. I stepped inside. With a single ding, the doors closed too slowly, as though reluctant to imprison whatever lay within. On the 9th floor, the hallway was colder. The carpet was patterned in dark red, like coagulated blood, and felt damp beneath my feet. Against the far wall, the door to room 909 stood slightly ajar. I frowned. I'd never leave a hotel door open. I tapped the handle. It swung inward with a rusty squeal. Inside was larger than usual, a deluxe suite, they must have called it. A chaise lounge sat before a wall-length window overlooking the city lights. A grand bed draped in maroon velvet dominated the center, but it was the crib in the corner that froze my blood, a small antique bassinet carved-in mother-of-pearl sheets, rumpled as if someone had just lain in it. I swallowed hard. Babies weren't part of my travel plans. I flicked on the lights. The room brightened, but the corners remained shadowed, as though reluctant to surrender their darkness. I crossed to the crib and peered inside. A rectangle of fresh soil lay in the mattress, damp and cool against my fingertips. My mind raced. Soil. In a crib. I stumbled back. A low hum filled the air like machinery powering on. The window curtains billowed inward, even though the windows were shut. I rushed to the window. The latch held fast. The crib's mattress shifted. I heard a soft rustle, as though something beneath the blankets moved. My heart hammered. I yanked the crib sheet aside. Nothing but soil and small, delicate footprints pressed into the earth. They led toward me, as though something had crawled upward and then paused, waiting. The lights flickered. When they came back on, I saw her, a little girl standing by the bathroom doorway. She couldn't have been older than 3, pale as moonlight, dark hair matted around her face, tangled with bits of dirt. I froze. Her eyes were vast, emptiness black wells that sucked the light from the room. She lifted one finger and pointed at the crib. Then she turned and padded toward it without a sound, her bare feet leaving clean white prints on the gilded carpet. I scrambled for my phone, no signal. The minibar buzzed as though some hidden compressor had kicked in. I felt the temperature drop so swiftly my breath fogged in the air. "Who are you?" I croaked, backing away. She didn't answer. Instead, she climbed into the crib, shaking sheets aside until she lay against the soil. She curled into a fetal position, clutching her knees. Then she looked up at me, and my blood went cold. Her belly was distended, swollen, like she carried something within. A soft sob escaped her, no multiple sobs, quadruple, in staggered rhythm, as though 4 tiny lungs strained inside her. The sound reverberated in my chest, pummeling my eyeballs like drums. My skin crawled. I forced my legs forward, crawling toward the door. But the chandelier above swung violently, splintering crystals rattling like teeth. My gaze shot back to the crib. The girl's belly bulged further, the skin stretched thin over some impossible shape. I couldn't tear my eyes away the outline of a second smaller head against her soft skin, tiny limbs stirring beneath. The sobbing crescendoed into a wet, gurgling wail. Then a dark trickle seeped from the girl's navel, thick black ichor staining the white sheets. She raised her arms, fingers clawed like talons, and beckoned me closer. I stumbled backward, head spinning. My back hit the minibar. Bottles of liquor toppled, shattering. Cold glass slashed my palms, but I didn't feel it. Behind me, the girl's wail warped into a chorus. Voices layered infant cries, whispered urgings, something older rasping through the walls. I yanked the door open and bolted into the hallway. The lights there were gone. Only emergency lamps cast a ghostly glow. I stumbled toward the elevator, but the doors refused to open. Then I heard tiny wet footsteps behind me in the corridor, each footstep closer, lighter than air. I ran one hand, pressing on the emergency stairwell door. It gave way. Inside, blackness yawned. I hurried down the stairs, racing each flight, while I heard the echo of footsteps, some floors above still coming. On the ground floor, the lobby remained empty, except for the front desk clerk, hands folded, watching me with hollowed eyes. I tried the front doors. They were locked. He spoke. "You can't leave yet." His voice was calm, almost comforting. "Let me out," I shouted. He stood, his form stretching impossibly tall. "She needs a mother," he said softly, covering my mouth with a pale hand. "You signed for room 909. You are chosen." Panic surged. I wrenched away, stumbling past the desk. I vaulted over the locked doors, shattering glass. Cold night air smacked my face. I ran, not glancing back. When I returned home, I found muddy footprints stamped across my apartment floor, and a damp rag folded on my kitchen counter, flecked with soil. No matter how often I scrubbed the footprints, never vanished completely. And sometimes, at night, I feel a presence rocking me from behind a soft, gurgling lullaby in the darkness, beckoning me back to room 909 to claim what I have already signed for. I arrived at the Crescent Moon Hotel late on a misty evening, the lobby's jade green marble floor reflecting my tired face. The bellhop, a wiry man with hollow cheeks, handed me a silver key fob engraved with 613. The front desk clock glowed. 37 p.m. Almost midnight. Perfect, I thought, for slipping into sleep. The hallway carpet was deep indigo, patterned with curling vines that seemed to writhe in the low light. Door 613 sat at the end like a silent sentinel. I inserted the key fob and stepped inside. The suite was spacious, polished ebony floors, a grand four-poster bed draped in silk, and a massive gilt-framed mirror dominating the far wall. My reflection lingered in its depths, tinged by lamplight. I dropped my bag and sank onto the chaise lounge, staring back at myself. A soft click echoed. I looked up. The mirror's surface rippled like water disturbed. My reflection blinked twice, though I had kept my eyes steady. My pulse spiked. I stood, advancing toward the glass. It was solid, no give. My reflection held a faint smile, but my expression felt stony, with exhaustion. I lifted a hand to touch the mirror. The glass was cold. Goosebumps prickled my arms. Then, behind my reflection, the room darkened, shadows pooling in corners. I spun. The door was closed. The lamps burned steadily. Back to the mirror. My reflection remained in dim light. A chill swept through me. Back on the chaise, I pulled out a book. Minutes passed, punctuated by the hum of the air conditioner. Then a soft, frantic tapping, tap, 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 like fingernails drumming against glass. I froze, heart in my throat. The sound came from the mirror. I set the book aside and sat up. Tap, tap, tap. A handprint appeared on the glass, slender fingers, smeared in crimson, though my palms were clean. The outline pressed against the mirror's interior, leaving a smear that oozed downward like leaking ink. I leapt up, backing away. The reflection shattered in a spiderweb of cracks, but the shards didn't fall. Instead, the mirror's image fractured into dozens of panels, each showing a different scene. My reflection at my desk, my reflection asleep, my reflection in the shower, and one blank panel where I could swear I heard a voice whisper my name. Jessica? My blood ran cold. I don't know why that blank panel felt awake. I groped for the lamp switch. Nothing. Panic clawed at my throat. The fractured reflection began to shift. The panels rearranged themselves, forming a new scene. The suite's bed, but empty. The sheets twisted as though someone had lain there. A pale figure sat on the mattress. Back to me, long hair tumbling down. I stumbled toward the door. The handle resisted my grip. The lock had clicked shut on its own. Tap, 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 now from the bedroom. The figure in the mirror rose, turning. The reflection's face was hollow with ink-black eyes and a grin too wide for a human mouth. I screamed. Light burst back lamps flared to life. The air warmed. The mirror's surface held calm reflection once more. I raced to the door. The handle turned easily. I didn't look back as I fled into the hallway. Later in the lobby, the desk clerk smiled his hollow smile. Problems with room 614. I nodded, unable to speak. He sighed. That mirror belonged to the original owner's daughter. She didn't like what she saw. He clicked his tongue. We'll place you in a new suite. Hope you sleep better. I boarded the hotel shuttle without asking where it would take me. As the van pulled away, I glanced back. The lobby's windows glimmered with distorted reflections, hundreds of faces staring out, eyes black as coal, grins wide and terrible. And I knew the mirror in room 613 wasn't broken. It was only waiting for the next reflection to shatter. I arrived at the Ainsworth Towers Hotel in the dead of night. Heavy rain slashing the neon-lit streets outside. The lobby was a glossy expanse of black marble and chrome, its silence broken only by the relentless drip of water from my soaked umbrella. The concierge, a tall, gaunt man with eyes like oil slicks, directed me wordlessly to the elevators and watched me step inside before retreating into the shadows. The elevator was vast with mirrored walls and a polished steel panel listing floors 1 through 30. I pressed 18, and the doors slid shut with a breath of air. The lights hummed as we rose. I checked my reflection, pale, exhausted, smeared with the memory of travel. The carriage slowed, dinging on floor 5, but the doors refused to open. A sudden chill settled over me. I tapped the panel. The buttons glowed, but only floor 5 and floor 18. I pressed 18 again. Nothing. The lights flickered hue, shifting from white to a sickly yellow. Then they went out entirely, plunging me into darkness. My reflection vanished. I heard a soft sigh like breath escaping a lung. Heart pounding, I pressed the emergency call button. Silence answered. A low creak came from above, like the elevator cable stretching. The carriage shuddered, dropping just a foot before grinding to a halt. I gripped the handrail. My teeth chattered. Then from the darkness behind me, a soft wailing let me out. It was a child's voice, tremulous and sorrowful. I spun, fumbling for my phone's flashlight. When it flickered on, the reflection in the mirrored wall showed a small girl standing beside me, wet hair plastered to her cheeks, frost-white gown clinging to her frame. I stumbled backward. She raised a finger to her lips, her eyes brimming with tears that glowed like embers. Then she pointed upward toward the ceiling hatch. The cry came again. I'm trapped! Summoning every ounce of courage, I pressed my fingertips to the hatch. It was locked. I heard frantic scratching above tiny nails scraping metal. As I watched the hatch warped inward, denting under pressure, splinters of wood flaked down and the scratching intensified. A screech pierced the air as the hatch gave way. I stumbled back, just as a slender arm burst through the gap. Pale, emaciated, its skin like cracked porcelain. The hand groped for purchase, then vanished as the hatch slammed shut above. The lights snapped back on. The elevator jolted and resumed its ascent, dinging softly at floor 18. The doors opened, and the corridor's carpeted floor glowed with small, wet footprints, leading away from the elevator. I bolted out, heart hammering, and didn't look back. The concierge was there when I reached the lobby, expression unreadable. "Everything all right with the service elevator?" he asked, as though expecting the answer. I only shook my head. He nodded and handed me a new key. Suite 1812. "It's far from the service elevators. Enjoy your stay." I fled out into the rain, leaving my luggage behind. Even now, hours later, I can still hear the soft scratching above me, nails on metal, and the echo of that ghostly child's plea, "Let me out." I arrived at the Moonshadow Hotel on a rainy November evening, the kind of rain that smells of ash and wet concrete. The lobby was lit by smoky chandeliers, their crystals trembling like suspended tears. Behind the desk, a stern-faced woman in a black velvet uniform slid my key card across to me without a word. 1313. She whispered, her voice barely carrying over the drip of water from my coat. Elevator to the 3rd floor, then left. The elevator ride was unnerving. The cables groaned under weightless tension, and the dim bulb overhead cast strange shadows that flickered against the mirrored walls. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor so silent that I could hear the hiss of the central air vent. The carpet, once a deep burgundy, was worn thin at the center, exposing faded tiles patterned with a labyrinth of curling lines. Room 1313 sat at the very end. The number plate was tarnished brass, the 3 nearly worn smooth. I slipped the card into the reader. A soft click, and the door swung open into a gloom that smelled of damp wood and something far fouler, like rotting paper left too long in a vault. Inside the suite was cold enough to see my breath. A grand 4-poster bed loomed against the far wall, draped in starless black curtains. Opposite it, a massive grandfather clock stood sentinel. Its face was cracked, the hands frozen at 3:13. Underneath a plaque read, "Property of Frederick Mallory, 1897. I shut the door, the click echoing down the corridor. The lights came on with a flicker. One lamp on the bedside table, and a small desk lamp by a velvet armchair. In the hallway beyond the doorway, the card reader blinked red, then green, sealing me in. I dropped my bag and approached the clock. The pendulum was motionless, its brass surface dulled by tarnish. A chill radiated from the clock's body, as though it exhaled decades of cold. I reached out to touch it. The wood felt slick as if coated in rain. When my fingers brushed the glass over the face, a soft rasp echoed like fingernails scratching metal from inside the clockworks. I jerked back, heart hammering. The clock's face seemed to pulse, the cracks widening in slow undulations. The hands trembled as though striving to move but remained stuck at 3:13. I backed toward the bed. My coat fell from my shoulders, the fabric sweeping dust from the floorboards. There, in the puff of dust, I saw a tiny smudge of red, like dried wax trailing from the clock to the bedside lamp. I pinched the lamp's switch. It buzzed, but the light remained the same, flickering unevenly. Shadows danced across the walls, shadows that weren't quite mine. I set my bag aside and laid down on the bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. Outside, rain pounded the windows, a frantic symphony of taps and drums. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come. Gradually, the rain faded, replaced by a dull thrum, as though something pulsed beneath the floor. Then I heard it, a single chime, low and resonant from the clock. I bolted upright. The hands had shifted. The minute hand crept toward 3:14. Though the hour hand remained stubbornly at 3, the chime came again, louder. Bong, bong. Each toll rattled my ribs like a sledgehammer. I leapt from the bed and rushed back to the clock. The pendulum swung now in deliberate metronomic arcs. With each swing, I glimpsed something in its reflection. A pale face, featureless, except for 2 smooth hollows where eyes should be hovering behind me. I spun. The armchair sat empty. The lamp beside it flickered, then went out in a sputter. I was plunged into near darkness, save for the moonlight slanting through the windows. The pounding beneath the floor grew louder, an unsteady throb like a heartbeat. I pressed my ear to the carpet. Beneath, I could swear I heard a faint, sobbing, soft, childlike tears leaking through wood and plaster. I tore away from the floor, stumbling back. The grandfather clock tolled once more. Bong! And the air exploded with screaming, a cacophony of voices crying out in agony, each shrill note slicing through the silence. My lungs seized. I covered my ears as best I could, squeezing my eyes shut. The pendulum's swing accelerated the face of the clock, rocking wildly. The hands reversed, spinning backward toward 3:12, 3:11. With every tick, the walls seemed to warp inward, the ceiling groaning like it would collapse. Time reversed for me, too, as if the suite existed in its own loop. I staggered toward the door, yanking the handle. It didn't budge. Panic bloomed in my chest. I turned, and the clock face cracked entirely, the shards of glass sliding open, like jagged petals. From the darkness, within a swarm of tiny writhing figures, poured out no taller than children, with stretched limbs and crying faces as pale as porcelain. They crawled across the floor in a writhing mass, reaching up at me with gaping mouths that emitted high-pitched screams I couldn't bear. I backed into the corner trembling. The pendulum crashed to the floor behind me with a deafening clang, and the figures froze. The clock's hands swung violently backward-forward until they locked again at 3:13. The figures faded like mist, their cries lingering in the air before extinguishing. The room fell, deathly silent. Each lamp blinked back on illuminating the wreckage, the pendulum broken shards of glass littering the carpet. The tiny handprints of the crawling figures smeared in dust and what looked like old wax. The grandfather clock stood silent and still, its hands once more fixed at 3:13. I didn't hesitate. I lunged at the door, slamming my shoulder into it until it flew open. I sprinted down the corridor. No lights, no sound, save my own ragged breathing, until I reached the elevator. I hammered the call button. With an agonizingly slow ding, the doors slid open. No mirror in this elevator, thank God. I pressed lobby and leaned against the far wall, shaking. When the doors opened, the stern receptionist looked up. "Everything all right, sir?" I wanted to scream, to tell her about the broken clock, the swarm, the reversal of time itself. But the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I clutched my coat tighter and nodded. I'm checking out." She slid the keycard back to me. "Room 1313. She asked, sliding it across. I swallowed. "Room 1313. I echoed, voice hollow. Outside, the rain had stopped. I never went back. But every time my watch ticks past 3:13 noon or midnight, I freeze, heart hammering, half expecting to hear the grandfather clock's final chime and feel those porcelain faces crawling across my skin once more. The Highland retreat looked innocent enough by daylight, quaint stone facade, ivy climbing towards slate rooftops. But I arrived alone at midnight, rain sluicing down the winding mountain road, soaked to the bone and desperate for rest. The lobby smelled of pine and mothballs. A single desk lamp cast a halo around the night clerk's pale face as he slid my brass key across the counter. "Room 725, he murmured, glancing toward a vent high on the wall. "If you need anything, call downstairs." I trudged through dim hallways of rustic wood paneling until I found the door. Room 725 swung open to reveal a modest suite. Twin beds, a stone fireplace, and a narrow bathroom beyond. The vent loomed above the headboards, an unremarkable grill in the rough-hewn plank wall. I shrugged off my coat and set my bag on the nearest bed, the pillows lumpy and cool. I built a small fire in the hearth and changed into dry clothes. As embers crackled, I sank onto the bed and closed my eyes. My breathing slowed until I heard it, a soft, rasping whisper drifting through the vent. "Oh, help me." My eyes snapped open. The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakably human and terrified. My pulse throbbed. I listened, straining. The whisper came again, more urgent. "Please." I shot to my feet. The fire popped. I crossed to the wall, pressed my ear to the vent. The metal was icy against my skin. Who's there?" I asked, voice unsteady. Silence. The stale hotel air pressed in. Then through the grill, the voice returned closer, sharper, as if the speaker had inched forward inside the duct. "Shh!" Heat drained from my limbs. The voice was a child's soft trembling. "I can't get out." My mind raced. The Highland retreat was only 2 floors deep. How could a child be trapped in the ventilation? This had to be a prank. Yet my heart clenched. "I'm not sure where you are," I whispered back. "Can you tell me?" A wet, stifled sob shattered the stillness. It reverberated through the metal like an echo chamber. "West wing? Behind the wall? Please hurry." Behind the wall. I sprang for the door, but it was deadlocked from the outside. I couldn't turn the handle. Panic bloomed. The sobbing came again, ragged with fear. I searched the small room. A maintenance hatch sat near the closet, its latch painted the same color as the wall. I pried it open. Darkness yawned within the faint duct beyond. The stench of mold and dust rose up. "Can you see me?" I whispered into the opening. No answer, only distant. Scratching. Then a whisper so close I thought it was in my ear. "Help me." My scalp tingled. I plunged my arm into the duct. My fingers brushed something slick warm. I jerked back. "What is it?" I asked, voice quavering. Silence for agonizing seconds. Then the scream, a single keening wail that echoed off unseen walls and rattled my bones. I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I slammed the hatch shut. My breath came in ragged gasps. The vent above the bed rattled, and the whisper broke through once more. Swift, urgent, distant. Find the door? I shook my head, trying to clear the haze. A child trapped in the walls. Find the door, I felt at the baseboards. One plank was loose. I pried it away, revealing a small cavity behind the wall. Inside, a fragment of tattered fabric, soft cotton stained yellow. A child's blanket, I realized with a chill. By then the whispering had grown to a chorus, dozens of voices layered in the hollow vent. Help me, please. It rose in pitch urgent, as though many children cried at once. I backed away from the wall, stumbling into the bed. The boards outside the closet shuddered, and a faint thumping came from the other side, like a small fist pounding to escape. My rational mind sputtered. The Highland retreat was centuries old. Ghosts clung to its timber and stone. I seized my phone and dialed reception. My fingers trembled. No answer, only static, and that pleading whisper. The thumping intensified. Behind the closet door, something scraped and begged. I lunged, yanking the door open. The narrow service tunnel beyond was stifling hot, the air fetid with decay. A single bulb flickered at the far end, illuminating a low, waist-high door. Inset in the stone, its wood warped and swollen. A thin beam of moonlight from broken vents revealed small handprints, smeared across the stone, wet, sticky, and tarnished with age. Beneath, faint scratches, 4 letters carved by tiny claws. Help! I swallowed hard and approached the door. It creaked as I lifted the latch. Inside lay a shallow crawl space, no bigger than a coffin, lined with rotting blankets and toy fragments half buried in dust. A child's doll face peered up at me, eyes gouged out, hair matted. A cold breath brushed my shoulder. I spun, and there, standing in the gloom, was the child whose voice I'd heard, pale, emaciated eyes glowing in the dark arms outstretched. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The air trembled with silent sorrow. I stumbled back, slamming the door and crouching beside the closet. The chain lock I found on the floorboard slipped into place, its cold metal final. From beyond the walls came a low moan, then silence. Waited until dawn. When the sun rose, I unlocked the door, but the crawl space was empty. No doll face, no blanket, nothing but stone and dust. The hatch stood wide open, as if I'd never found it at all. I checked out without breakfast. The clerk offered me a smile, empty and polite. We had a ventilation issue, he explained. No one stayed in 725 for months. I didn't argue. I drove away as fast as I could. But late at night, when wind rattles my windows, I still hear those tiny voices crying through the vent, and I feel the soft brush of cold fingers reaching out, begging once more, help me. I arrived at the Wexford Annex under a bruise-purple sky, the last vestiges of twilight bleeding away. The main Wexford Hotel was closed for renovations, so all guests, myself included, were crammed into this smaller outbuilding across a shaded courtyard. The proprietor, a worn man with slate-gray skin and weary eyes, handed me a plastic key card stamped Annex 4A without ceremony. Hallway E, he nodded, voice hollow. Good night. The corridor was narrow, lit by flickering sconces that cast pale yellow pools on the faded wallpaper. Tired floral patterns curled along the walls as if straining to escape their frames. My footsteps echoed too loudly, a reminder that I was alone. I reached room 4A, slipped the card into the reader, and let myself in. The room was modest, a double bed with a thin comforter, a desk cluttered with half-burned candles, and a grimy window overlooking the courtyard. The carpet felt like damp moss beneath my toes. I dropped my bag, feeling the exhaustion of travel heavy on my bones. The proprietor's keys still jingled in my hand when I realized I'd never turned on a light. Strange, I was sure the room had been illuminated the moment I entered. I tapped the switch. The overhead lamp sputtered, then glowed. All was still. I set the keys on the desk and went to the window. The courtyard's lanterns were dim, and in the far corner, I saw a lone figure, tall, dark, and utterly still beneath the arch of an oak tree. I blinked. The figure vanished. I rubbed my eyes, but when I looked again, the courtyard was empty. I closed the curtains and lay on the bed, willing sleep to find me. My eyelids fluttered shut, and I drifted. A faint clatter woke me. I bolted upright. My heart hammered. The desk was overturned, candles rolled across the floor, wax dripping molasses dark stains into the carpet. The key card lay cracked in two, its plastic splintered. I reached for a candle on the floor, my fingers trembling as I lifted it upright in its holder. The flame guttered, then steadied, casting long, shivering shadows. From the hallway came soft thumps, like boots dragging across worn wood. I turned to the door. The cracks under the gap glowed with the candle's light then. A shadow passed across them. A tall, thin silhouette window, shouldered and impossibly long-limbed. I swallowed hard. "Hello," I called, voice tight. My words thudded back at me hollow. No answer. Only the slow, deliberate scrape of something moving along the corridor. I leaned close to the peephole. Nothing visible outside, just the dull hallway. I pressed my eye against the glass lens. The hallway was empty, until I saw my own reflection there, except the eyes in that reflection were black voids, and the mouth curled into a grin that I never wore. I recoiled, stumbling into the bed. The candle trembled, threatening to gutter out. I clutched the comforter to my chest, dread pooling in my gut. Then came a soft sigh from the desk. I whirled. A sheet of paper lay atop the overturned lamp. One of the guest registers opened to my name, but in the margin, someone or something had scrawled a message in spidery handwriting. "There is no foray." My breath halted. I stumbled across the room, fingers brushing the register. The page flipped slowly, as though guided by invisible hands, revealing nothing but blank lines. My scrawl of booking details, name dates, were gone. The candle flickered violently, throwing the room into fits of light and darkness. In the shadows by the closet, I saw movement, a black shape melting into the dark. My pulse soared. I backed away, struggling to keep the candle upright. A hollow whisper curled from the closet my name. "Jamie." It was breathy, longing, sorrowful. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a cry. My legs shook, and the carpet seemed to writhe beneath my knees. The whisper came again, closer, "Jamie." I forced myself to inhale, then speak. "Who? What do you want?" The whisper answered with a rustle, like silk sliding across the floor. Then into the candle's flicker, I saw it. A tall, gaunt figure emerging from the closet, shoulders hunched, limbs too long, head tilted at an impossible angle. Its skin was the color of stale paper eyes, nothing but hollow pits. I dropped the candle. Flames licked at the carpet. I yanked open the closet door, fumbling for the figure's arm. My fingers passed through empty air. The figure had become a ripple in space, a pocket of darkness hovering non-corporeal. The temperature plunged. My breath formed clouds. I turned for the door, only to see that the handle had vanished. In its place, the wood grain stretched into a gaping maw of darkness, slimy and writhing, as if the door itself had grown a mouth. Panic seized me. I raced to the window bars, welded across it, the latch painted shut. The room spun. The thing glided toward me, a silent predator in the half-light. It stopped mere inches away. I could smell it, a sour, metallic tang like rusted iron. I slammed into the wall behind me. The room felt impossibly small. The figure stretched out a hand, fingerless, and traced a line down my cheek with its cold touch. I shivered where it passed, my skin prickling. Why, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. It cocked its head in mimicry of curiosity. Then it pointed behind me toward the bed. I dared to look. There, etched into the wood headboard in deep gouges, was another message. You've never existed here. The figure's whisper tickled my ear. Not here, not ever. Understanding washed over me. If I never existed here, then what was I? A ghost trapped among ghosts. The prophecy of a vanished guest folded into the fabric of the annex. The whisper turned to laughter, low, hollow, echoing. The room flickered. The walls bled shadows. The figure lunged. I screamed and plunged forward, leapt onto the bed, and the mattress vanished beneath me, an empty pit yawning open, breathing cold air up through the sheets. I plummeted. I woke with a gasp, sprawled on the hallway carpet, heart slamming. My head throbbed. My pajamas were damp with sweat. The storm was gone. The corridor lay silent and bright in morning light. My key card, miraculously whole, lay on the floor beside me. I scooped it up and ran past the empty rooms, past the flickering sconces, past the desk where the proprietor stood polishing glasses, eyes blank. He glanced at me, nodded, and said, "Good morning, sir. Breakfast is served." I didn't reply. I clutched the card as I fled the annex, my name in my pocket penned on a hotel receipt, Annex Crave. I tore it to pieces and let the scraps flutter away in the wind. But sometimes, late at night, I feel a presence hovering just behind me. A cold breath, a soft whisper, "Jamie, Jamie." And I realize that no matter how far I flee, I'll never quite escape the place where I was never meant to be. I arrived at the Sea Breeze Hotel at dusk, the ocean wind tangling my hair as dawn's pastel sky faded to indigo. The concierge, a stooped man in a salt-stained blazer, greeted me with a damp smile and handed me a chipped porcelain key fob engraved 202. "Welcome," he croaked. "Watch the tide." His eyes darted toward the lobby's wide windows, though I saw only darkening waves beyond. Room 202 sat on the second-floor corner suite with 2 windows facing the shoreline. When I stepped inside, the room smelled of brine and sun-bleached wood. Nautical decor lined every surface, a ship's wheel mounted above the bed, faded maritime maps on the walls, and a glass display cabinet filled with seashells and sea glass. I set down my bag and walked to the windowsill. Through the glass, the sea thrashed under a gathering storm. On the nightstand lay a small wooden box latch undone. I hadn't seen it on the floor plan or on the dusty counter when I checked in. I opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a jagged shard of shell swirling white and gray as though carved from foam. Beneath it, etched into the wood, were two words, "Take me." My pulse quickened. I glanced around, no note, no explanation. I slipped the shard into my pocket and shut the box. The latch clicked into place of its own accord, the box vibrating with a murmur I couldn't place. That night, thunder rolled over the waves. I drifted into uneasy sleep, the room's shadows long and restless. In the early hours, I awoke to movement across the carpet. A soft tap, 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 like a fingernail rapping on wood. I sat up and blinked. The box sat on the floor by the door, its lid open but empty. I scrambled out of bed. The shell shard was gone. I pressed my ear to the box silence. My heart dropped into my stomach. I tore the box upstairs to the hallway, but it remained locked tight when I tried to open it. Returning to the room, I found the shell shard on the edge of the bathtub, balled in a fist of blackened seaweed. I set my jaw and picked it up, its surface slick and alive under my touch. As soon as I lifted it, Sinmoi, the tide beyond the window, swelled with unnatural ferocity. The shutters rattled and the air filled with the creak of timbers. I stared at the shell and felt an itch at my navel, like a finger tracing my spine. I staggered backward. The shell's swirl pattern shifted, and the gray became a darkness seeping from within. I dropped it, but it rolled to my feet, spinning toward the bed like a playful toy. I kicked it across the room. It clattered against the dresser, yet rolled right back. A whisper slid through the air, soft as foam washing ashore. "Free me." I whirled. The window panes rattled, tiny cracks spidering across the glass. I heard something scrape behind the walls, a slow, deliberate drag. "Stop it," I hissed, voice raw. "I don't know what you want." The shell hopped once, then twice, and settled upright on the floor, pointing its jagged edge in my direction. My skin crawled. I backed away, but my feet tangled in the blanket, and I fell. The tide hit the windows. Waves battered the hotel as if drowning it inch by inch. Water seeped beneath the door, pooling at my ankles. In that dark floodlight, the box floated through the open doorway and came to rest beside me, its lid raised in silent invitation. I pressed a hand to my mouth, watching in horror as something bloomed inside the box. Pale fingers webbed and slick, clawing their way into view. Then a face, half girl, half creature, with seaweed hair plastered to her forehead, and eyes like deep wells of tidal pools. She stared at me with forlorn, longing mouth opening to gurgle inhuman words. I scrambled away, but the room stretched impossibly long door, receding from me like a vanishing horizon. My breath came in ragged gasps. The creature slid from the box, its limbs knobbly and thin, dripping seawater onto the carpet. Each step left a salt-stained footprint that hissed where it touched the thin carpet fibers. It cocked its head, fragile ears brushing its shoulders. I noticed now that its belly curved outward, pregnant with the sea itself, I thought. From that swelling rose muffled cries as though tides raged within her. "I can't," I whispered. She raised one webbed hand and pressed it to her own mouth. "You must." The water level in the room rose to my knees. I clung to the bedpost, knuckles straining white. The creature reached the box and crouched, lifting the lid. Inside was only darkness, endless, hungry. The seaweed hair dripped water into the void, splashes echoing like distant thunder. The crush of waves beyond intensified into a roar. The creature looked over her shoulder. Her eyes glistened with tears of salt. "Release me," she pleaded. "Release us." I tried to speak, my tongue thick and heavy. The box lid clattered, and I realized the shard of shell gleamed at its center as though beckoning me. I understood. To open it fully, I would set her free and invite the sea's horrors into the world. Lightning split the sky. The windows shattered inward, spraying glass and salt water. The creature rose to her full height, childlike, yet impossibly tall under the roiling flood. She extended both arms, the shell shard floating between her palms like an offering. She whispered, voice rippling like waves against rock. "Take me." I hesitated, terror and pity warring inside me. If I took the shard, if I opened the vessel completely, would she vanish, washed back into the brine? Or would she drag me down into the abyss with her? My mind flashed to the concierge's warning, "Watch the tide." I sank to one knee, fists clenched in the rising water. The shard hovered before me, an instrument of release. The creature's tears fell onto the box's filigree, each drop sending ripples across its surface. With a trembling hand, I reached for the shard as my fingers closed around it. The final whisper drifted through the storm-lashed room. "Thank you." I squeezed the shell and felt a wrenching pull, as though parting a veil between two worlds. A blinding flash, and then silence. The tide receded. The room stood empty, shattered windows, soaked carpet, and the box turned upside down, empty, unspeckled by sand or shell. I collapsed in the still air. Dawn's first light filtered through jagged panes. I found the concierge in the lobby, pale and drawn. He nodded when he saw me. "I watched," he said softly. The tide went back. I nodded, too weary to speak. In my palm lay the shell shard, its gray swirl dulled and cracked. I dropped it into a potted plant and walked away without looking back. Sometimes when the ocean calls at night, I still hear her voice in the crash of waves. "Take me." But I am far inland now, no tide to watch, no shards left in my hand. And I pray she found her freedom beneath the sea where all lost things return. I checked into the Ivory Harbor Hotel late on a storm-slick night, the rain beating against the grand portico like a hail of nails. The lobby's marble floor gleamed beneath a single swaying chandelier, and the air smelled faintly of salt and candle wax. The night receptionist, a pale woman whose lips were pressed so tightly I thought they might split, handed me my key without a word. "Room 1208, she whispered, voice brittle as dried leaves. I followed the velvet-roped path to the elevator. Its brass doors closed behind me with a groan. The cabin smelled of ancient polish, and the mirrored walls trembled with every bump of motion. When I reached the 12th floor, the doors slid open onto a dim corridor lined with ornate sconces. Only room 1208 glowed. The others remained dark. Inside the suite, a heavy velvet curtain covered the sole window. I flipped on the light, an old-fashioned fixture that buzzed and sputtered before illuminating faded damask walls and a four-poster canopy bed, dressed in moth-eaten lace. On the nightstand sat a porcelain music box, its lid cracked dust gathering in the hinge. Beside it lay a folded card, "Do not wind," tired and wet. I shrugged off the warning. I lifted the box's lid, revealing a tarnished key. With a sigh, I wound it. Immediately, a soft tinkling filled the room, the familiar strains of Rockabye Baby, but warped, fractured each note dragging behind the last until the air seemed to freeze around me. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the curtain came a low sob. My blood ran cold. I twisted to face the curtained window. The fabric quivered, though no breeze stirred. The sob grew to a keening whisper, lullaby, lullaby. I snapped the music box shut. The tune died. Silence blanketed the suite, but the sobbing remained closer now, like a child huddled in the next room. A single tear carved a wet track down my cheek as I realized I was alone. No neighboring rooms, just this corridor of dark doors. I tried the window. It was firmly latched. I couldn't pull back the curtain. The sobbing became a chanting lullaby, no longer faint, but directly behind me. I froze, every nerve ablaze. The canopy bed's lace swayed as though brushed by a hidden hand. Then a voice whispered in my ear, soft and sorrowful, "Hush now, darling, sleep." I whirled empty air. My heart hammered. My fingertips found the music box. Without thinking, I snapped it open and wound it again. The lullaby began, tinny and off-key. Instinct urged me to let it play, as though the song itself warded off some greater terror. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a shape materializing in the gloom near the far wall. A little girl, pale as new-fallen snow, wearing a tattered nightgown. Her eyes were closed, her lips moving in time with the music. She clutched a battered teddy bear to her chest. I looked down at the music box. The key spun on its last turn, the melody winding down, yet the girl's lips continued parting. I could hear her soft humming behind the few remaining notes. Her head tilted toward me, dark eyes opening in the instant the last note died. I froze as her eyes, black as bottomless pools, fixed on me. She took a step forward, gliding through the carpet like mist over water. The teddy bear's button eyes fell away as she lifted it, revealing a hollow hole. "Won't you stay?" she murmured, voice echoing in my skull. "Stay with me." A thunderclap rattled the walls. The chandelier swung violently, scattering light and shadow. The room's temperature plunged. My breath puffed in white clouds. I backed away, crashing into the nightstand. The music box toppled its key, still winding itself, refusing to stop, even as the lullaby twisted into a dissonant dirge. The girl raised the teddy bear, its hollow maw opening as though to speak. From its throat spilled the lullaby again, but this time layered with countless distant cries, other children's voices pleading, lamenting. They echoed through the suite, reverberating off every surface. I covered my ears, but the cacophony only grew. The girl drifted closer, extending one pale hand. Her skin was cold and damp. I could see veins pulsing beneath it, tinged with inky blue. "Your turn," she whispered. "Sing." My eyes darted to the bed. Among the tangled sheets lay an old cracked cradle, its mobile swaying by itself. Silvery lullaby music emanated from it, softer than the box, yet thrumming with an otherworldly resonance. I realized with horror I had become the song's next singer, a guest invited to join the eternal chorus. My legs gave out. I sank to the carpet, tears blurring my vision as the girl knelt before me, her mouth opened wide. From within came a ghastly lullaby, one I had never heard yet knew by heart. It wrapped around me, each syllable a hook twisting into my mind. I fought the compulsion tearing at my hair, squeezing my ears. The room warped around me. The walls curved the damask pattern stretching like flesh. The chandelier shattered glass raining down. The music box flew into the air, spinning like a top before slamming into the floor, its neck-cracking twang joining the chorus. Then silence. The girl and the cradle were gone. The suit rang hollow dust motes drifting in a shaft of moonlight through the broken chandelier. In the stillness, I heard my own breathing, and the faintest echo of a lullaby, as though it lingered just beyond hearing. I forced myself to stand. My hand closed around the music box's key. I snapped the lid shut. The room brightened, lamps clicking on as if nothing had happened. In the hallway, the elevator dinged doors sliding open. I stumbled out, hair unkempt, clothes damp with a cold sweat. The pale receptionist watched me step past with those same solemn eyes. She whispered, "Thank you for your song." I didn't respond. I fled through the lobby into the stormy night. The wind tried to sing its own lullaby, but I could only hear the one now etched into my mind. Night after night, I waked to its haunting melody. Tinny fractured a child's voice, slipping through my dreams, begging me to stay. Stay. And I know I will never be free of my song. I arrived at the Crescent Vale Hotel under a cloud-choked sky, the wind picking at my coat as I rushed through the ornate entrance. The lobby was a grand hall of polished oak and gilded moldings, its silence uncanny. The clerk, a dignified woman with ashen skin and hollow eyes, passed me an ivory key card, stamped 5 without a word. Only when I reached the elevator did she murmur, voice low and urgent, "Don't look at her eyes." On the 5th floor, the corridor stretched endless and dimly lit, carpeted in a pattern of interlocking vines that seemed to shift underfoot. Room 517 stood midway, its door framed by a tarnished brass number plate. I swiped the card, pushed the handle, and stopped. Inside, the air was cold enough to see my breath, and the lights flickered on with a hesitant buzz. The suite was generous, a sitting area with a plush chaise, a writing desk piled with antique books, and a grand 4-poster bed draped in burgundy velvet. But what seized my attention was the portrait hanging above the fireplace mantel. A woman in Victorian dress, severe yet elegant, stood against a stormy backdrop. Her dark eyes met mine immediately, and I felt a tug in my chest, as though the canvas breathed. I shivered and turned away. After settling my bag on the chaise, I made tea in the corner's ornate kettle, trying to ignore the portrait's unblinking gaze. Steam curled into the air like ghostly tendrils. I sipped, eyelids heavy from hours of travel. That night, sleep arrived fitfully. I dreamed of the woman stepping from the frame, her skirts whispering across the carpet as she drifted toward me. I woke with a start to find the portrait's eyes glinting in the half-light. I pressed my hand to my chest. My heart thundered. I tried to dismiss it hallucination jet lag, but the next morning brought no comfort. I dressed and left for breakfast. The lobby was empty except for the clerk polishing silverware behind the desk. She looked up as I approached. "How was your room?" she asked, voice brittle. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Room 517, she sighed. That portrait belonged to Mrs. Eliza Thornton. Tragedy struck her family in the 1890s. She never left that suite." I frowned. What tragedy? Her eyes flicked to the antique bell on the desk. She glanced down, then back at me. "Her daughter," she replied. She vanished one stormy night into thin air, they say. Eliza died of grief weeks later. Guests often report odd things in 517. I nodded, stomach tightening. Thanks for letting me know. Back in the suite, I closed the door and pressed my back against it, as though bracing against a gale. The portrait's woman stared body rigid. I turned to the fireplace and saw for the first time a second painting leaning against the wall face down. My heart lurched. I approached slowly and hesitated before flipping it over. It was a portrait of a little girl in a white frock face, blurred by age and water damage. But as I studied the pale patches, I sensed movement. The blotches shifted, coalescing into two dark eyes and a small mouth that curved into a mournful pout. My knees buckled. I set the painting back down, but I couldn't stop the tremor in my hands. That evening, thunder rolled against the windows. I lay in bed, staring at the velvet canopy, trying to ignore the portrait of Eliza. At midnight, I heard soft footsteps on the carpet outside the sitting area, light uneven. My pulse raced. I slipped from the bed, pulling on slippers, and crept toward the fireplace. The second portrait had shifted positions. It now faced the room, fully turned toward me. The little girl's eyes were clear, deep pools of sorrow. I reached out, trembling, and touched the frame. The glass was warm, too warm, and I felt a tingle at my fingertips. A whisper, "Mama." I spun. The room was empty, but the floorboards held the imprint of small, bare feet leading toward the door. I followed, pressing my ear to the wood. From beyond the wall, I heard muffled sobbing and the one-word plea, "Help." I yanked open the door. The hallway was silent and empty. No sign of other guests. No flicker of light in any other suite. I ran back, stomach in knots, and slammed the door shut. The lights blinked out. I fumbled for my phone, dead. When the lights returned, the portrait of Eliza had changed. Her lips were slightly apart, and her eyes were wetter, as if tearful. I felt tears collect in my own eyes. The air tasted briny. From the darkness near the chaise, I sensed movement. I didn't dare look, but I heard a soft, ragged breath, someone kneeling. The whisper came again from the sitting area. "Mama, where are you?" My blood ran cold. I edged toward the chaise, heart hammering. Beneath it lay a locket, tiny silver heart-shaped, its clasp undone. Inside, a dried rose petal and a faded photograph, a woman and a little girl smiling. The resemblance was uncanny, Eliza and her lost daughter. As I held the locket, the portrait above the mantel trembled. Eliza's figure seemed to step forward, her skirts rustling, brows furrowed with desperation. She lifted one delicate hand, gesturing toward me as though pleading. A crash echoed from the corner. The child's portrait had fallen face down, its frame cracked. Beneath it, a pool of water shimmered on the carpet, footprints leading from that spot to the door, tiny and wet. I staggered back, keys rattling in my pocket. I grabbed them and dashed for the door. The knob turned stiffly as though coated in rust. When the door finally creaked open, I bolted down the hallway, past motionless doors, past that silent portrait dangling on its nail. In the lobby, I found the clerk sitting behind the desk, hands folded. Leaving so soon, she asked, voice quiet. I can't stay," I gasped. She nodded without surprise. Understandable. Many can't. I handed her the locket. "I think she wants this back." Her eyes glowed in the lamplight. "Thank you," she whispered, taking it. Her daughter can finally rest. I fled into the stormy night rain, soaking me to the bone. Behind me, I heard a soft sigh, not of wind, but of release, a gentle exhale of sorrow. I never returned to the Crescent Vale, but sometimes, in quiet moments, I feel a presence at my shoulder and hear a small voice murmur, "Mama," and I pray that somewhere beyond the veil, Eliza and her child have found each other again, eyes no longer hollow, hearts no longer fractured. I arrived at the Seacliff Manor Hotel just as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, its last rays gilding the rocky shore. The lobby was tranquil, lined with oil paintings of shipwrecked vessels and salt-whitened cliffs. A uniformed porter handed me a heavy brass key stamped 314. "Dinner service ends at 10, he intoned. "After that, we have our own hospitality." I nodded, unsettled by his tone, and climbed the grand staircase to the third floor. Corridor E smelled faintly of sea spray and old wood polish. Room 314 sat midway its door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open into a suite bathed in warm lamplight, a sitting area with sea glass vases, a writing desk scattered with travel pamphlets, and a four-poster bed draped in linen embroidered with sailing ships. On the ornate sideboard, a silver dining set, plates, cutlery, goblets gleamed as though freshly polished. Next to it sat a note in slanted script. "Your private dinner awaits. Please be seated." My stomach growled. I poured wine into a goblet and pulled out one of the covered silver platters. I lifted the lid and froze. Beneath lay a perfectly roasted fish glistening with lemon oil and herbs, steam curling from its tail. No ice in its tray. Nothing to preserve it, yet it looked impossibly fresh. I set the lid back down and reached instead for the bread roll beside it. The crust was crisp, the interior soft and warm. I tore a piece and bit into it. As the dough melted on my tongue, a shiver ran down my spine. The room grew colder. I lifted the lid again. The fish's eyes stared at me, large, unblinking, as though freshly plucked from the waves. I swallowed hard. A soft chime echoed from the hallway, someone closing a door. I spun. The corridor lights flickered through the peephole, then went dark. The in-suite lamp buzzed and dimmed. I pressed my hand to the fish. Its skin felt damp and pulsing. I yanked my hand away, heart pounding. Another chime, the suite's door opening. I crept toward it, hand on the knob, only to find the hallway empty. The corridor lights remained out. Silence pressed in. I slid the bolt shut. When I returned, the bread roll had been replaced by a small chocolate cake, its frosting shaped like a ship's bow. Next to it lay a folded card, "Main course in 10 minutes." My pulse raced. I paced, trying to calm my breathing. 10 minutes passed in agonized dread. Then from the distant kitchen vents, I heard clinking dishes, muffled voices, the scrape of chairs on tile. The door crackled with static electricity surging through its frame. Suddenly, a tray slid under the door crack, silver domes in a row. I pulled them inside, heart thundering. Under the first dome, a platter of oyster shells still briny. The second roasted quail feathers removed the meat gleaming. The third, a mound of steaming vegetables, greens pulsating as though fresh picked. I staggered back as a whisper curled from the walls. "Enjoy your dinner." The words reverberated, layered like a dozen voices speaking at once. My skin crawled. I realized then that every course appeared without explanation, without cooks delivered by unseen hands. The silverware tinkled, sliding closer to my plate, as though arranged by invisible guests. I tried to flee, but the door wouldn't budge. The lights dimmed to near darkness, lit only by candlesticks that ignited along the sideboard, tall white candles with blood-red wax dripping down their holders. From the darkest corner emerged a girl in a stained maid's uniform. Her eyes ringed with red hair, streaked with salt water. She glided toward the sideboard, her movements precise as she laid out another place setting opposite mine. My breath caught. The place was draped with a white cloth, and atop it rested a doll with glass eyes, my own face painted on it. The cloth trembled as if brushed by a breeze, and the doll's eyes tracked me. The maid lifted the cloth and doll by its shoulders, sliding the doll into the empty seat. She bowed her head toward me. Dinner is served. My heart thundered. I backed against the wall. The table extended outward, pressing the chair closer to me. The dome lids clattered open on their own, revealing a final platter, a whole roast unspeakable crimson, dripping with dark sauce. I realized with horror that it was a human heart. The plating was grotesque artistry veins arranged like rose petals, valves coiled like snail shells. The heart beat faintly, each throb staining the sauce deeper. The maid's voice slithered through the room. "Will you share? Or be the main course?" She raised one skeletal hand toward me. I turned away, vomiting against the carpet. When I looked up, the room had transformed mahogany walls slick with seawater, the table heaving like a ship's deck in a storm. The candles snapped out, plunging me into darkness. The heart's beating filled my ears, and I felt something warm seeping along my ankle. I scrambled for the door. The handle turned, no lock, no resistance. I burst out into the hallway, gasping, abandoning the maid and her table behind. The corridor lights blazed. I dashed down the stairs, not daring to look back. In the lobby, the proprietor stood by the desk, polishing a goblet. He glanced up as I hurtled past. "I trust you enjoyed your dinner," he asked politely, placing the goblet on the counter. I fled into the night sea wind smashing against my chest. In my pocket, I found a small porcelain shard, the maid's doll face cracked in half. Sometimes when the ocean calls me back, I feel the weight of it in my pocket, and I hear the distant clink of silverware and the faint, mocking voice, "Your dinner awaits." I arrived at the Royal Regent Hotel on a chilly January evening, the wind ripping through the city. Streets like ragged fabric. The lobby's marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, their prisms scattering pale pools of light. The concierge, a stoic man in a midnight blue tailcoat, extended a white-gloved hand and handed me my keycard. "Room 2205, he said quietly. "Enjoy your stay." His eyes lingered on the chandelier above, as though it held some private dread. I ascended the grand staircase, each step echoing in the silent hall. On the 22nd floor, the corridor stretched endless and pale, lit by sconces shaped like torches whose flames refused to flicker. Room 2205 beckoned at the far end. The door opened smoothly, revealing a suite bathed in warm lamplight, rich mahogany furniture, a seating area by a bay window, and towering above the center of the room, a massive crystal chandelier suspended so low that its lowest prism hovered only a few feet above the Persian rug. I dropped my bag and sank onto the chaise lounge, eyes drawn unwillingly upward. The chandelier's crystals dripped like frozen tears, and in their facets, I thought I saw movement shadows flitting across its many angles. I shook my head. I was tired from travel. I would rest, then explore the city come morning. That night, I lay in the four-poster bed, curtains drawn tight, but I slept poorly. At exactly 2:22 a.m., I awoke to a soft tap. 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 Like fingernails drumming on glass, echoing from directly above my head. My heart thundered. I sat up, propping myself against the pillows, and the chandelier swayed gently, though there was no breeze in the room. I rose and padded barefoot beneath it, staring up into its glittering depths. The taps continued, soft and deliberate tap. 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 I reached out and gently touched one crystal. It was ice cold, sending a shiver up my arm. The prism wobbled, and at its core, I saw a pale face flattened as though pressed against the inside of the glass eyes, wide with terror, mouth agape in a silent scream. Then it was gone. I stumbled back, my breath catching. The room felt suddenly too small, the walls looming closer. I told myself it was a trick of light exhaustion, playing cruel games. I returned to bed and pulled the covers tight over my head, willing sleep to reclaim me. But less than an hour later, I was jerked awake again by a whispering cascade of voices chanting in urgent, broken tones. The duvet slipped from my limbs as though pulled by invisible hands. I sat up, lungs heaving, and stared at the chandelier. Its crystals glowed now with an inner light, each prism reflecting the room in miniature. In every reflection I saw myself kneeling in supplication to the fixture, head bowed, shoulders trembling. Something inhuman. Tinkling laughter echoed through the suite. It came from all around me and nowhere. I felt dread pooling in my gut. I slid from the bed, each step careful and quiet, approaching the chandelier once more. The tapping resumed, rapid now, as though impatient. Tap, 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 tap. Suddenly, a dark shape darted behind one of the crystals. I leapt back, heart in my throat. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to steady my breathing. The chandelier swung violently, scattering refracted shards of light across the walls, and the ceiling above it cracked, thin fractures spidering outward. A low guttural groan rolled through the air, and one of the largest prisms shattered, sending jagged glass raining down around me. I ducked beneath an antique console table as the chandelier crashed to one side, its iron chain twisting and groaning. In the space above the broken arm, I glimpsed a dark silhouette, tall, faceless, a wisp of shadow clinging like smoke. I bolted toward the door, but the corridor beyond lay impossibly distant, its lights too dim to guide me. Frantic, I returned to the chandelier. The broken prisms lay scattered like crystalline teeth, and from amid the wreckage emerged a tiny skeletal hand. It grasped one shard and held it aloft. As I watched, dozens of such hands, childlike white as bone, slithered out from the center of the wrecked fixture, scuttling down the chain toward the crystal-strewn rug. Each hand held a fragment. Each fragment flickered with a fragment of that terrified face. A chorus of whispers rose, pleading, chanting, "Help us! Free us!" My courage shattered. I slipped past the crawling hands and fumbled with the door lock. The keycard reader glowed red, then green. The door swung open to a corridor, now bright and empty, as though nothing had occurred. I fled, without looking back, heart hammering like a war drum. In the lobby, the concierge glanced up as I burst through the doors. "You look unsettled, sir," he said softly. My voice caught. There was something in my room, in the chandelier. He nodded gravely. The chandelier was imported from a manor in northern Bay Ridge. It was said to hold the souls of children lost in a fire. We removed many of its prisms after guests complained. It was merely a standby fixture, not used in decades. I swallowed hard. I broke it. He touched my arm gently. Better it be shattered than bound. I never returned to the Royal Regent. But every time I close my eyes, I see those pale hands clutching crystal shards, hear the scratching tap, 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 and feel that soft, desperate whisper echo in my mind. Help us.